TD, Andrew Doyle.
Thank you, Lasky and Corla. Like others, I welcome the opportunity to speak on this bill, the Protection of Life and Pregnancy Bill, though I'm sure, like many others, it would have been far more comfortable had we done like what 6 previous governments have done and just decided to ignore the fact that we have a constitutional position which has to be addressed. That has been reflected. It has been stated that we need, as per the European Court of Human Rights has stated, that we need to give certainty by way of legislation or regulation. Because the fact is that since 1983 we've had neither. And that's the 8th Amendment. Last night we voted on the 31st Amendment. So 23 amendments later, all of which have been dealt with by way of legislation and regulation have been dealt with. And I have no doubt, but had the decisions and the Supreme Court case in particular determined that suicide was not grounds for provision allowing for an abortion, then it would have been demanded of us to put in place legislation by some of the people who say it's not necessary today, and it would have been done indeed. So what is this bill meant to do? This bill is meant to reflect and restate the general prohibition of abortion in this country, to make it illegal. But it also has to reflect on what the the 8th Amendment has said, and it is also duty-bound to give medical certainty, to give legal certainty to the medical profession. So it has to reflect the fact that the Constitution says that there are medical grounds when the life as opposed to the health of the mother is at risk, that a termination can be permitted. It does include suicide, and we've heard much discussion about the fact that we didn't have evidence available to us then. And there is no doubt, and Section 9 says that it has to be the only treatment for suicide, the only treatment. And that is very, very difficult to actually ascertain beyond all doubt. Perhaps there are cases where there is a history of mental illness, where there has been a history of threatened suicide or attempted suicide indeed in the past, where it might be, it could be stated probably unequivocally, but it is very difficult. So the regulations were duty bound to reflect that, and that's what we have to assess the bill on. Does it achieve those two very, very basic requirements? Everything else flows from it. The bill is actually quite short for a comprehensive piece of legislation that proposes to do so much and to deal with so much that has been undealt with. So I think we have to examine all of the control measures that surround the basic principles of the bill and satisfy ourselves in our conscience, if there was never a free vote, if there was never a quick vote rather, that it does that, and that we can reconcile that with ourselves. For me, it does. I have to be honest and say that if I had my way, suicide would not be something. But as the Minister Costello has said, that's not a luxury we have. We are duty bound as legislators to reflect what the constitutional position is. I personally would have preferred that we could have dealt with, and Deputy Hannigan mentioned it, about fetal abnormalities. And I'd like to ask the Minister to clarify. It seems that the current position is that early induction can take place at 36 weeks, 35 weeks, I'm not quite certain, in the case where a fetal abnormality is diagnosed beyond all doubt, and where the fetus cannot survive outside of the womb, totally incompatible. We have, as several members here have met parents who've gone through that particular experience, and the anguish is palpable. They're actually making a case for this, not for themselves, because God forbid they'd ever go through that same experience again, but for others. And I think it's something I would love to have seen dealt with in this legislation. I understand that the Attorney General's advice is that it can't be, that it contravenes Article 43.3, and reluctantly I may have to accept that. But that is, I actually firmly believe that should be dealt with outside this debate maybe anyway. Just going back to the other major point, that this is the wedge that opens the door for the floodgates to open. I think it's been made quite clear that anything else that happens has to go to referendum. And regardless of what happens, if we decided tomorrow we're going to just forget about this bill and let the next government deal with it, the people who want a more liberal regime with abortion, want more choice for women, are not going to stop no matter what happens today or tomorrow or next week. It's not the issue. We have to put our trust in the people. If in some time in the future a referendum is put to them to make a decision about that, it's not for us to tell them. It may be for a government to decide to hold a referendum, but after that it's up to the people. And that's who we're not putting our trust in. When people don't put their trust in this legislation, they're not putting their trust in what people will do in the future, their own fellow citizens. So I think that that's what we should bring some sense of context to all of this. So there's probably not a more divisive piece of legislation that will come before any of us in our careers, long or short, in this House. I absolutely respect the opinions of others. That are heartfelt, they're sincerely held, and I believe that I would hope that they would do the same for me and for everyone else. I don't like being the definitions of pro-life and pro-choice. I consider myself to be as pro-life as anybody. I do not want to see a regime in place that allows abortion on demand. But there are people who hold that view who are quite upfront about it. But there are people who consider, even trying to reflect what the constitutional position is, that if you don't have their opinion, you're not pro-life, and I reject that. And I'd like to commend the effort, and we might have a lot of things to complain about the government, but there has been general support across the Houses, and there's divisiveness across the floor of the House. But in general, people are actually making a point on how they firmly believe not to score political points. And I think from that point of view, the manner in which this legislation is being debated is to be welcomed. So I just felt it was important that we all as many of us who feel we should put our point of view across on the record in this House. And I'd like to commend the bill. Thank you.